Okay, now we'll just start. I'd like to welcome everyone for coming on the call, a webinar on IPAF's new Spotters course. I'd like to welcome some of the guests. Is Paul Roddis, Head of IPAF Training worldwide. We've got Gary Hutchinson, Business Unit Manager from John Sisk, and Ivan Conway, EHS Director for Winthrop Technologies. Thank you very much for coming on board, guys. And Paul, if you want to take it away there. Thank you.
Thank you. Do that. Okay, yeah, that seems to be working. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to our panel for joining us as well, particularly. So I'm Paul Roddis. I'm IPAF's Trading Manager, but thank you for the promotion, Damien. I appreciate that. I want to start off actually just telling you all a little bit about what IPAF is, because you might not even know. So we are a not-for-profit membership organisation. So any money that comes into IPAF is used directly for promoting and enabling the safe and effective use of powered access worldwide. That is what we do. It's the only reason that we exist. We're all over the world, staff in multiple locations, and our members, we've got now 1,990 in 84 different countries, which is absolutely spectacular. You can see we started in 1983, so we probably would be described as middle-aged now, I guess. But that's got to be a good thing. We're mature and we've learned. So what makes IPAF so special, so incredibly important, is its membership. So we're a not-for-profit membership or organisation owned by its members. So if we start off looking at what makes up this membership that is so special, well, we'll start with manufacturers. So people who manufacture MEWPs, hoists, mast climbers, over 90% of all MEWP, hoist and mast climber manufacturers are members of IPAF. Okay, that's really incredible. So obviously they see the value in it, we see the value in them, and of course we can learn from what they're doing and solve all of the problems that they can sort of present us with. Training members. When we understand what we need to do, the most important thing that we can do really is get that to that end user. And of course, it's our training members that take that message right to that end user to make sure that they've got the message, they understand it, and they can actually implement it. So again, absolutely key. We've got a wonderful range of rental members. And of course, it's those rental members that have this sort of unique insight from the end user, because they're the ones supplying the MEWPs that are understanding their challenges and then can bring that back to the table so we can look at solving those particular problems. We have safety professional membership. So again, what a pool of resource that we have there to work with. But for me, the most important resource from an information perspective are our contractor members. And it is, of course, the input from these contractor members that has allowed us to create training that actually meets their needs and works for them, rather than us doing it in isolation. It's also the contractors that have been part of the creation of this particular solution, which is the Spotter course. And it was they that first realised that it was needed, and actually that this was part of the solution. So we'll talk a bit more about that later on. So these are our current contractor members, and of course more and more contractors are joining IPAF and looking for IPAF trained operators, IPAF Rental Plus companies. And IPAF in fact runs a powered access contractor forum that's open to any contractor to join. And we of course will work closely with those contractors to understand and support issues arising on site. Contractor membership it's cheap. It really is cheap. I don't know exactly how much it is, because that's not really my role, but I think it's about £270–270 a year to have a seat at that table with your peers, with these incredible range of contractors, to learn from them, to discuss challenges and therefore solutions in this sort of neutral environment. So really, really valuable. And of course, everything that we do, including all of these discussions, centres around what is the most important thing of all from IPAF's perspective, and this is the IPAF Accident Reporting Portal. So this now has been ongoing since 2013. It actually started in 2011, but it's been really official since 2013. It was an idea, in fact, of Peter Douglas. It's such a good idea, in fact, that Peter's now our CEO and managing director. But it was a case of tell us what the problems are, keep telling us, and then we can start to work out what we need to do about them. So we now have this incredible database of information that tells us what's really happening, where and how, to who, and so on. But of course, having that information just on its own is not useful. It's what you do with it that really matters. And one of the things that we do with it is IPAF creates a global safety report every year. Now, what I should now say is actually an award-winning global safety report every year. And this is absolutely brilliant. I mean, I cannot praise it enough. It is a superb document. I use it regularly. It's free. Just go on the IPAF website, open it up. It's interactive. You can find all of the information you need about what has happened. Absolutely wonderful document. So this is just one tiny part of it, but for me, very, very useful. And this is looking at the top 6 fatal and major incident trends over quite a span of time, so 2013 to 2024. And we can see that these remain the top 6. So these need to be tackled the most. And something that's really sort of concerned us is this particular line here, which is essentially entrapment. So entrapment is now on the rise in this sort of short-term period of time. So what does that really mean? Well, essentially in 2024, there was an increase of 75% on reports of entrapment from 2023. I mean, that is a huge increase. And that culminated then in 21 fatalities, so an increase of 62%. And this is, 21 people that they went off to work for the day, they're doing a job, and maybe they're a little bit complacent or whatever, but they literally lost their lives. So their families, they lost husbands, partners, etc., parents. Obviously, we need to tackle this very, very strongly in every way we can, which means we also need to really understand it. And part of the perception challenge that we came across is that it was very much understood that mobile booms, large boom lifts had the potential for entrapment, and so a lot of secondary guarding was created to sort of solve that problem, etc., to try to help with it. And it definitely has. I mean, if we look at this sort of 3-year total for mobile booms, we can see 35% of entrapment in mobile booms. But I think from a perception perspective, something that is really concerning actually is the 3A mobile vertical actually results in a greater number of entrapment incidents. And that did surprise people. But of course, there's loads of innovation going on now. People are creating secondary guarding for mobile verticals as well, which is going to be really, really, really good. That's part of the solution. And actually, this is where these particular contractor members came in, because another part of the solution is a human part. And what started really as a quick chat really about some of the challenges at the IPAF summit in Dublin grew through the efforts of these IPAF contractor members into something special. And it really shows what can be achieved when we work together with these common goals. So thank you very much to Designer Group Dornan, H&MV Engineering, Mercury, Sisk and Winthrop Technologies for getting us to a position where we can create this thing. So having a look at this MEWP Spotter course, I think is going to be something really good for everyone on this call. We start off with a map. Now, I had this map created in actual fact, a little IPAF world for the operator course, and we've recreated it for this spotter course. It doesn't have to be a map, but ultimately what happens is they go through the various different sections, learning different things as they go on their journey. We can also see it as a list, which then will actually literally tell you what's all coming up and so on. So we start off with a bit of an introduction, then we've got enough information about MEWPs and their uses that is going to be useful for a spotter. We don't need to go into huge depth. They're not operators, but they need to know enough about some of the way these things work. They need to know a bit about their legal duties, and then a very, very important section, communication and signalling. That's a really key component, of course, of a spotter's role. But of course, hazard awareness. We need people to be aware of hazards, and with spotting, it's awareness not just of the hazards to you, but also to the MEWP, to the operator, and so on. And of course, that's intrinsic to the planning. And then, of course, we'll finish off with a summary. So what does it look like? Well, we start off with this sort of very clear visual component. And what is a spotter, I think, is a good question to start here with, because there may be people on the call that literally don't know what a spotter is. We've got people from literally all over the world on this call. So a spotter in real terms it's another pair of eyes for that operator, because sometimes it can be very challenging to see everything in your environment because you're trying to look in 3D and so on. And what you can see at the bottom of this list is the thing that I've mentioned about tackling entrapment and crushing areas. So where that risk exists, another pair of eyes can be incredibly helpful. What else the spotter does? Well, of course, observing the MEWP and its surroundings, communicating with the MEWP operator, but also potentially initiating emergency procedures. So we've gone for potentially initiating them because we're not going to dictate what that spotter should be doing. It can be different for different employers, different contractors, different sites, different spotters with different levels of experience. So we've given the general and useful information. So as a spotter, some of them will be just wanting to initiate the rescue plan by raising the alarm, saying, right, something's happened, now we need the team in to do this. Okay. But others may be the actual nominated ground rescue person if they have that level of knowledge, skill, experience, and therefore they can take that responsibility. So that is down to the individual to be sort of assessed as to, through risk assessment, as to what level they need to be. And it also gives a route of responsibility that can be followed as we go through that. So looking at the recovery and rescue plans, I want to go through this sort of briefly, very, very briefly, and in sequence of risk, I think, because I think this is always valuable. We always need recovery and rescue plans, of course we do, because things can happen. But it is going to be the spotter that's going to be the start point of this, because they're the ones that would raise the alarm. They might be the ones that gets an ambulance on the way. If someone's collapsed in a MEWP, get an ambulance on the way before you do stuff. We know that. So the spotter can literally do that. They're there at that point. Then what happens? Well, it depends. But definitely, once that plan comes into place, the plan should be looking at the easiest and safest ways of doing it. So the first thing is recovery, just recovering the MEWP down, which could be operator using the platform controls or the auxiliary platform controls, or it could be an occupant doing that. If that doesn't work, then we've got the ground controls for recovery to bring it down, or we've got the auxiliary ground controls. So we've got 4 things, potentially 6 if we've got an occupant in it now, before we get to this point, which is contacting the supplier, asking the engineer for advice, or even getting them out to get the machine down. If no one's harmed up there, what's the problem? Only if all that fails do we end up getting to this mid-air rescue. And it does concern me, there seems to be a bit of a feel at the moment where people think mid-air rescue comes a lot earlier than that, and it really doesn't from a risk perspective. And of course, very last would be, emergency services in the form of fire and rescue to literally rescue someone. So that rescue plan, you can see the sort of intricacies and differences of that. A spotter can play different roles within that, depending on who they are, their knowledge, their experience, and so on. So it's all in there as information. They may be minorly involved, or they may be much more heavily involved. But something they will definitely be involved with is communication and signaling. And this is where we've been very clear on the level of, literal clarity that's necessary for these things. So, simple commands like stop, raise, lower, toward me, away from me. They can't be misinterpreted, unlike left and right. Is it your left, my left? And some people, of course, get left and right wrong. So that's not great. But quite frequently, of course, you're a distance away. And verbal signals, therefore, wouldn't be that useful. So that's where we move on to these hand signals. And what we've done with the hand signals is, rather than just showing what they are in a flat two-dimensional way, we've actually contextualized them, so it gives a real feel for what does this really mean? Where would I use this? So what you can see there is, the operators operating the MEWP, they're responsible. They can't really see all of it all at the same time. So the spotter, being that second pair of eyes, telling them how close the boom is to something else, is extremely useful. Similarly with slewing, there's two things to look at. There's a counterweight and a platform. I mean, we've exaggerated a bit, but you can see that the value of that spotter actually being able to indicate real specific distances to that operator to allow them to make those decisions. So all of that's brilliant, but we also, of course, have to keep the spotter themselves safe, because they can be at risk. Of course they can. So it's all about positioning themselves to remain safe and visible. But what does that mean? Well, there is a difference between where a spotter should be if a boom is traveling or if a boom is working. Okay, so here, boom's working, so the operator is where you would expect, kind of against the wall, potentially doing some things. So we would ask the question, well, where do you think you should stand as a spotter? And they would then select. So if they select the wrong one, like in this case, they've selected D, it'll say, no, that's not right. You should be in B, and give a very brief little sort of verbal explanation of it. Well, that's great. We can then take that, which is our first sort of look at this concept of it, provide a bit of information. And then what we will do is we're using basically learning science to build on top of that, because that's the way the human brain works. We're consolidating that information, and we do it with this brilliant visual, which is extremely memorable. It's hard to forget that visual. Very, very easy to understand, and you can see, okay, yellow's safe, brilliant. So that is then taken away. The operator understands that, the spotter understands that, that spotter is safe. So when we go to traveling, as I say, it's different, because the whole thing's moving in a different way. The dynamics are different. So when we look at traveling with a boom, we've again addressed this with a similar sort of methodology, but we've just sort of turned it a little bit backwards, and we want them to tell us where either wouldn't be safe or wouldn't be useful, because it's great being safe, but if you're not actually useful where you are, that's not really any good. So we want them to now find either the blind spots or the bits that aren't very useful. So again, they'll select now and get some feedback, and it'll say, this is a good place to be, this is not a good place to be, and so on. So the visual nature of it is far, far, far more memorable and useful than words, than text. Okay, trying to memorize things, it just literally doesn't work. But that is an imprint. Once that understanding's there, it just stays there. And then we, of course, had to tackle a slightly different problem, which is around with large verticals. Something that we've sort of always said is, you need to maintain line of sight with the operator if you're a spotter. But that's not possible. You can see that's not possible. So we're actually asking them potentially to do something that is impossible. And where that's the case, they have to break the rule. If they're breaking that rule, well, does that mean they can break other rules? Okay? And of course the answer is no. So what we have to do is have a rule that actually works. And this is where we put quite a lot of thought into it, and we determined that there are certain things that will remain in sight. Of course they will. And these can be our controls. So what we would know is that we would agree, of course, with the operator beforehand to communicate regularly anyway. But the way to do it is to stand in that safe place, again, detailed by the yellow, and be able to see the controls. So that MEWP won't move without the use of the controls. So, of course, the operator is actually working. So they're working away, etc. But then before they come down or move the MEWP, they've got to come back over to the controls, acknowledge each other, have that conversation or signal, or make sure that it's safe, and then it can move. So that solves that problem. And it means that spotters don't have to potentially break the rule of losing line of sight when it's actually impossible to do so. So finish off by just once again thanking these brilliant people that enabled us to create this really special training course, and also thank you very much for joining this webinar. Now we're actually going to give this training to IPAF independent instructors if they request it from us. So if you are an independent IPAF instructor, just get in touch with us at IPAF and we can send it to you so you can take the course and it will hopefully enhance your training of the operator course and so on. So thank you very much for listening. I will hand back over to our host Damien now, and you can hear from the people you actually want to hear from. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate that. As Paul said, my own name is Damien O'Connor. I work for IPAF in Ireland, and I work quite closely with the contractors both in Ireland and the Irish contractors carbon across Europe. So to start, I just want to introduce both of our guest speakers again, Ivan, Conway, and Gary. Thanks very much, guys, for taking the time to come on today. I suppose to start with you there, Gary, if you just want to introduce your organization and just a few words about yourself and the role that you do within your company.
Thanks, Damien. So Gary Hutchinson is my name. I'm a business unit health and safety manager for John Sisk and Son. So we are predominantly a construction company from working throughout Ireland, the UK, all over Europe as well. Currently around 3,000 employees worldwide. And my role, I suppose, business unit health and safety manager in Ireland. So my role stretches the length and the breadth of Ireland, you could say.
Thanks very much, Gary. Appreciate that. And yourself, Ivan, if you just want to introduce yourself there to everybody on the call.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name's Ivan Conway. I'm the EHS director with Winthrop. In the role for the last 4 years, I suppose in safety since 2005. Came from a civil background, so MEWP definitely was a new element to me 4 years ago when I came into the Winthrop side of things. So I suppose Winthrop itself, a data center focused general contractor GC, was originally an M&E contractor for a number of years, and transitioned across into the GC role, and we're working, I suppose, across Europe, Finland, Sweden, Netherlands, Ireland, Germany, about to enter Portugal and Italy. So yeah, it's a lot of different jurisdictions. We have about 4.5 or 5,000 people on average on our projects on a daily basis, and MEWP use would be definitely on the high end across all those projects.
Thanks very much, Evan. Just a few questions for you both we'll go through. So Gary, just to ask you there, I suppose what difference would maybe using this course or having it to your subcontractors and yourself, what would it do, make a difference on site? And how do you expect it to change the day-to-day behavior on site with maybe spotters using this course and the fact that it's come from yourselves?
Yeah, for me, Damien, it's all about standardization and consistency. I suppose what do I mean by that? It covers everything from communication, signaling, where they position themselves under spotting machineries, the same type of training, the same level of training, throughout the whole industry. What I've noticed over the years, Damien, is I might be trained on one job as a spotter and I'm spotting on my project, and then I'll go to a different project with a different company and I'll be trained to a different standard, to a different level. And then there's a huge breakdown around that consistency. How we communicate with our operators. The operators are not used to how I communicate and hand signal and then how you do and how the next person does. So for me, it's getting consistency with this role, and in my opinion, it's a critical role.
Very good, thanks. And yourself, Ivan, what would you say as a contractor and the amount of people you have? I suppose, how would you sum it up in one sentence? What does a spotter mean to you as a contractor?
I suppose it's probably hard to sum that up in one sentence, Damien, but look, it's fundamental, and I suppose it comes back to a safety point of view, but the approach of everybody that's probably on this call, which is to try and get people home safe every evening to their loved ones. And it's fundamentally, it breaks down into that. I suppose there's a lot of fanciness around maybe health and safety at times, but ultimately what we want to do and achieve through the implementation of the spotters, as Gary has described there in a consistent fashion, is to get people, whether they're mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, home to their loved ones every single evening, and that's what this spotter course will help to do.
Yeah, and I suppose, you know, as a contractor, they sometimes might say like a spotter is nice to have rather than essential. With the range of MEWPs and machines out there at the moment, you know, what would you kind of say on that statement?
Yeah, look, safety has evolved, construction has evolved, safety has evolved. Maybe that would have been an argument a number of years ago, but it's the role of the spotter is an essential part of construction at the moment, where MEWPs are in use. From our point of view, we see the spotter across multiple different benefits, we'll say. So whether it's controlling exclusion zones, preventing people from getting into the area in the first place, whether it's directing helping to direct the operator in a safe fashion. And like as Paul mentioned earlier, right into the emergency side of things. So whether it's creating the alert or whether it's actually performing the lowering of the MEWPs should somebody get into difficulty. It's a critical role, and it goes back, I suppose, to the one sentence answer earlier, which is this is how we get people home safe every evening, and that's what it will do. So, safety is evolving, and I think this is part of it.
You know, just before I go back to Gary there, for those on the call that have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat, and we'll try and answer them towards the end. Gary, yourself, you know, if you were speaking to your site managers, what do you feel would be the most important thing for them to understand about what the role of a spotter is, or to other site managers?
It kind of overlaps what Ivan's just after saying around it's an essential role. The role of a spotter can't be seen as a tick box role. To spot themselves, they need to have the authority to challenge unsafe behaviours, to stop operations if something looks unsafe or if it's not unsafe. Regarding site managers, I'd love site managers to have planning conversations with spotters and with MEWP operators around setting to work and getting advice and getting feedback. At the end of the day, spotters, they're going to be the experts in their surroundings. So involving them in conversations for me would be brilliant.
I suppose both of you being, you know, very supportive IPAF members both here in Ireland and across Europe. I suppose either one of you can answer this question, but what was the moment when you thought, you know what, we need to formalize this? I do believe it may have started with a conversation with both of you at one of our meetings, but if you want to start there, Ivan.
Yeah, I suppose, look, I think everybody knew that there was a gap, and to put some perspective on this, we would have projects that would have between 250 and 300 MEWPs on just one project. We have one project in Sweden where we would have rolled out our own internal spotters course just on one project, and we would have 1,300 people would have been trained internally by Winthrop on the MEWP Spotter training course that we developed in-house. And I suppose when we were chatting at that particular meeting, and Gary was there, and we all knew that there was an issue and something needed to consolidate maybe the approach, because as Gary mentioned earlier, different contractors would maybe have different elements of their own training which might contradict what others were doing. And look, the reality is we share resource pools in various different jurisdictions, so people are going, whether they're companies or individuals, are going between the different contractors from definitely in the data center side of things, and that's a constant. So like, to be fair to the people involved and fair to the contractors and fair to ourselves, we felt that if there was a consolidation of the course delivered by experts in the field, such as IPAF, it would become just like other courses that are out there, empowering the people that would actually take the course, get the experience, and perform the role on the projects. And I think the three of us have probably talked about getting parity for a MEWP spotter to maybe a banksman for a lifting operation, and the authority that they would have on a project, that nobody would dare breach a barrier around the lifting operation, where a banksman would be enforcing that exclusion zone, or and not take instruction from that banksman. And that's where we wanted to get to from a spotter's point of view. And I think while separate contractors, as you mentioned earlier, probably would have driven this internally themselves, getting this delivered by IPAF just is the next level altogether, and it brings that consistency that Gary has been talking about.
Yeah, and yourself, Gary, I think I remember that. I believe it was in Port at an IPAF members meeting when this conversation started about 18 months ago. But have you anything to add to that there?
Yeah, for me, there wasn't a trigger moment as such. It was more so around seeing patterns. Um, Different people carrying out the role as spotter, no consistency, as I've touched on. People are carrying out the role, but they're doing two or three other roles at once, and they're not really focused on the MEWP and the operator. So when you combine them all, I suppose it kind of raised alarm bells, and that's where the conversation started.
Very good. And Ivan, yourself there, like you said, you started 4 years ago, moved in, and I suppose got that baptism of fire where you walk straight into the what are MEWPs and where have they come from and how did I end up with 400 on a project? I suppose when you started using spotters first, what would have driven that decision? What trends did you see to say, okay, we have operators, but they need more help?
I suppose spotters were in use. I joined in 2022, and spotters were in use across the company at that stage. But I'd say maybe the consistency in their application and the particular role was a little bit different. To be honest, I feel like a bit of an imposter on this call today. If we said that I'd be on this call 4 years ago, I would say that I'd probably disagree that this would be the case because of my low knowledge when it came to MEWPs. Maybe that was an advantage because I was untainted looking at the operations, looking at the various different, I suppose, challenges that exist within the industry. And look, the spotters have, I suppose, the current level we have is it's a far cry from where we were in the early stages of the spotters. The spotters were always there, was always a requirement on our projects. I think just how it's been rolled out is a little bit different these days.
Yeah, thanks very much. And Gary, look, I know you mentioned about lack of consistency. But what type of training did you see, for the spotters before, and what were really the problems? I know you mentioned some of it, inconsistency, but was there anything else that stood out?
Yeah, well, inconsistency is the main one, but for us, we have an internal course called Plant Vehicle Marshal (PVM), um, and we would deliver that, but that was more so focused on larger machinery such as excavators and dumpers, for example. We were rolling that out and do roll it out with booms, but it's not really, and it's not specific at all to MEWPs. So there's a bit of a breakdown there. Even the communication, the hand signals is slightly different. So with that difference, I suppose, from MEWP spotting versus machinery spotting, they just don't link in.
Okay, yeah. Ivan, I suppose, look, I know some of your managers have done this course as well, and outside of spotters, who would you recommend this course after seeing it? Who would you recommend it outside of spotters from a learning point of view? Is it just not the spotter, or do you feel like supervisors and managers should be looking at this as well to understand the role they're supervising?
It's very hard to supervise. It's very hard to, I suppose, engage in activities and point out maybe issues or maybe reinforce a good behavior unless you understand what that behavior actually is and what it should be. For that reason, I suppose, yeah, we will be having our supervisors and our safety teams complete the course, but also within our own organization, safety is driven by the highest levels within the organization, our MD, CEO, our operations directors. And something that I hear constantly from our operations director is in order to know how to reinforce that good behavior. They have to understand what the good behavior should be. So I think even our operations director at that level within the company, they will be undertaking the course as well. So it's a big issue for us. It hasn't, thankfully, we haven't had incidents related to it because I believe we've put such a focus on it. But having that knowledge at the highest level and be able to engage effectively with the people that are doing the work, I think is essential to reinforce that good behaviour or identify where it needs to improve. So it'll be a wide band of people that will be doing the course on our behalf.
Thanks very much. Gary, for yourself, look, you've been around long enough on projects, is there any situation that you may have seen or come across in different industries? And what I mean is, I'd say in construction, but different trades, maybe where you saw an incident and where a spotter could have prevented it, not necessarily in Sisk, but just from your career in construction yourself. Is there something that would have stood out, have gone, that could have been prevented by, someone having the knowledge in that role?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, I've had to be involved in a number of investigations with MEWPs, none of them overly serious, thankfully. More so like collision type injuries and that. But from every investigation I've been involved in, had a spotter been present, we wouldn't have had an incident or an accident. And
Right.
that's a guarantee.
So
Up as recent as a couple of weeks ago, somebody operated a MEWP and made contact with an architrave of a door. Now, they shouldn't have been doing that, but there was no spotter present, and had there been, it absolutely wouldn't have happened. But every investigation that we've been involved in, if there was a spotter there would have been no event.
Very good. Ivan, for yourself, the types of MEWP operations you most commonly see on site, where you think maybe the spotters acquired, is it moving machines? I know you say you work in data centers, so is it becoming more and more the tight areas, the amount of equipment, whether it be plumbing, electrical, that need to go into these areas, and this is where the second set of eyes come in. Are they some of the common risks that you'd see, or is it position machines?
It's everything, to be honest with you, Damien, but definitely in particular data center designs, it can be tight. It can be hard to get at the work effectively. If you don't follow a clear sequence, it can be challenging to get back in and get at work areas subsequent to works taking place. I suppose the majority of the MEWPs on our projects are the three mobile verticals and or the scissor lifts, and they are the most common that we have. I think there's a perception maybe in around the boom lifts being the dangerous ones when it comes to entrapment, and I think the secondary guarding definitely has increased and has become I suppose common in the industry that those pieces of equipment aren't allowed onto sites unless secondary guarding is in place. But as Paul mentioned earlier, where we are at the moment as an industry, there is more people getting entrapped on the scissor lifts than previously or than currently on the boom type lifts. So look, that is a challenge, and the next step I think is to try and handle that challenge as an industry with secondary guarding on their scissor lifts. And I know in some of our similar companies over in the UK are looking at making that mandatory already. So I suppose that's probably the next step in the industry, but it is challenging. It's hard to get people into these spaces, hard to get them to set them to work safely. But that's our responsibility when we are setting people to work, is to set them to work safely. And I think that's a challenge across the industry at the moment.
For yourself, Gary, if you were to pick somebody on site to assign a spotter role or to go on the course to, is there a particular type of person you'd be looking for? Or which people do you think should take the MEWP spotter course? Like traditionally, I suppose, even from my point of view, coming from construction background and then sites on the contractors with IPAF, we typically see it's the 18 to 24, 25-year-old, but which is fine. They're a junior member of staff. But I suppose the question for you would be, it's not everyone that could be suited to the role. They should have certain criteria that they should meet. Would there be someone in particular that you choose, or what would you look out for?
Yeah, the type of persons is very important, Damien, in my opinion. It has to be someone who's task focused, not carrying out multiple roles, but themselves. They have to be confident They have to be confident to speak up, raise concerns if they arise, be a strong, clear communicators is nearly most important. Preferably, it's someone who understands and is familiar with MEWPs and the task at hand. So that type of person, it obviously may vary depending on the contractor and the trade and what they're doing, but the same message applies. It's a strong communicator, someone who's confident to speak up.
I suppose, yeah, looking at the spotters course, it's a good way of getting people into looking at the MEWPs and, building that confidence, whether they be apprentice or trade. Ivan, yourself, I suppose blind spots, communication failures you may have seen on site. Is there any that you feel like, having that spotter with that confidence that you mentioned earlier on, you wouldn't walk in front of a banksman, why would you walk in front of a spotter? Is there any you would see that a spotter would reduce, the risk in that practice?
Yeah, I suppose specifically we would have areas in our projects that what we would call tight spots or tight areas where works needs to take place. The access around that area, maybe their corridors to different work zones, whatever needs to be controlled. Ideally speaking, it's done in a fashion where nobody needs to pass. That's not always possible in reality. So you might have to carry out intermittent work to allow work to take place, hold up people from going through. And then once the work has taken place in that short duration, to allow the flow of people back through the corridor again. The control of that through spotters, the control of that, the planning of that is essential. And if you don't get that right, you end up with potential issues. And I think something we have to be very mindful of is with the spotters, with the use of spotters, we are putting people around plant. We need to make sure those people are competent for the roles that they're performing. But also when the piece of equipment isn't moving and there's working taking place at height, well, there is a drop zone involved in it as well. And while the spotter is taking care of keeping everybody out of that drop zone, it's important the spotter stays out of that drop zone themselves. So control of that, the setup of it, the planning of it needs to be a real focus, I think, and not introduce additional risk by controlling one and that you don't create a second. So I think like on our projects, a lot of people, a lot of movement, work progresses at a phenomenal rate, to be honest. But the priority has to be around safety at all times. And empowering these people, as we were saying, just like banksmen for lifting operations, empowering our MEWP spotters is incredibly important. And that means, I suppose, when the senior management are passing through these areas, they are taking the instruction just like everybody else and given the authority to the person performing the role. And that's how you really empower the spotters on the projects.
There you go. Thanks very much. Thank you very much to both of you. Paul, do you want to look at some of the questions there that have come in as well, Paul? I can answer some. Thanks very much to Gary and Ivan. We appreciate your time. And to the other contractors mentioned on the call, I suppose there has been a significant amount of work that have gone into this in the last 12 to 14 months. So I'm not sure if Paul is still on there.
Yeah, absolutely, I am. And so, I'll answer some of the questions that have come in. Have you got the questions open as well, Damien?
Yes, I have, yeah.
Okay, so I think, the first question it is about translation in real terms. Now, we currently don't have any plans to translate. The investment in creating this training course was really quite significant. So we need to see it being out there, being used and so on before we can then start considering going down the road of translating it, because it's a significant process translating. I know it seems as though you can just put it into Google and get it changed, but it's nothing like that. It's complex, it's costly, and therefore we need to enter into that with our eyes wide open to know exactly what the benefits are going to be. So, it would be on the table. We'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Next question has come from someone some of you might have heard of, called Rupert Douglas Jones. And he has asked, Has the new course been aligned with EN 12480-1, which defines the internationally recognised hand signal used by signallers and banksmen? Well, of course, one of the important things to point out is this is not a signaller banksman course. Okay, that is a different role entirely. Okay. And the actual answer is this course has been created to align with the Safety Signs and Signals Regulations 1996. And it also, of course, had to select the signals that were already being used. So when these wonderful contractors very kindly shared what they were doing with us, we could see what signals they were already teaching. So the fact that they corresponded with the safety signs and signals regulations requirements for those hand signals meant that it was a very easy gelling together of that. And the final sort of icing on the cake to ensure that that was definitely the right one was when we look at those international signals, for example, for stop, I think everyone, literally everyone globally, without any language whatsoever, knows that that is stop. Of course it's stop. We know it's stop. But yes, when you look in those international signals, the actual signal for stop is some sort of strange arm movement to the side. You know, that's not stop. So it wasn't even logical. So we've gone down the regulatory role because that works. We've gone down the role of using what was already being used, which makes a lot of sense. And in order to support that further, we're actually going to be creating a toolbox talk and some posters which can, be around the site. So that is going to sort of cement that a very easy, clear knowledge of what these particular signals are, which, in all honesty, are pretty obvious anyway. So our next one is from Barry Brady. Is this aimed as an online course? Should the spotter carry an IPAF card? Well, I mean, it's online. It is e-learning, but an IPAF card, that is actually a license. It's called a PAL card. It's a powered access license. So the only people that should ever be carrying a license is someone who is licensed to operate a MEWP. Okay, this is a very different qualification, so it doesn't get a license as such. You get a certificate which would say, yes, you've qualified in MEWP spotting. So they won't get a license, Barry. We went down the e-learning route, Aaron, because we surveyed, we asked what the challenges were essentially to getting this training done. And part of it was convenience, clarity, similarity. And of course, when you have a lot of people that need to do this in exactly the same way, and you need that convenience, the best, most cost-effective solution was e-learning. It's something that we could control, that we could do at a known rate, so we could get something out to the people that needed it as quickly as we possibly could. So that's why we've gone down the e-learning route. We know that contractors are already assessing their teams on their ability to use hand signals and things like this, and that will continue. And in the site inductions, the specifics for those particular spotters, that will come from the site inductions and not from the training itself. So e-learning was a really good fit for that. What else have we got? Right, Damien, do you want to answer one?
On that last one there about the e-learning, from spending a lot of time on sites with contractors, part of it is, yes, it's e-learning, but it takes photographs all the way through. The spotter needs to sit and interact with the course. But the bonus is, if we give them a practical, it brings a problem. They believe that what they do in the training center, every machine is the same. And we see sometimes, again, that with operators. So we're putting the onus, I suppose, back on the spotters to have that conversation when they go out with the operator. Why is this machine different? To talk about it, understand that no two are the same. When it comes to a crane, yes, cranes are bigger, but they're all similar. The largest scissor lift I've come across on site recently is 37 meters high and weighs 39 tons. If we were to teach a person on a 19-foot in a training center, they may get a different perspective. So again, helping the spotters understand that communication is key. And I believe I had a conversation with Ivan about this, that conversation about speaking with the operator when we go to site. Just looking at the other questions there, Frank Thornton there, I believe it's a training center. Just one thing I noticed, the spotters course is very good. Is it impossible to include hand signals on the course, on the operators course? I presume, Frank, that's eventually going to come on the next, cycle of the operators course. But at the moment, it's good for the spotter to have something and explain it and agree hand signals with the operator when they go to site. They're a partnership, so working together and again, communication about what they do, the size of the machine, what signals they agree on is important.
Yeah, I'll just add in, Damien, if you might, I don't mind. That's of course being supported with the toolbox talk and the posters. But the point is the signals are very clear. They're not difficult. So once you see them and you've used them a few times, you just totally get it. So you can feed those in during practical sessions. You can use them to communicate, and it will become normal. And that's what we need. We need it to become normal, and then it just works for everyone. So you'll be able to make use of those in the interim.
There's just one question there. Great point in regards to different machines with different specs. Working with the manufacturers, would it be worth considering QR codes to be generated with each machine showing visuals? Some of the manufacturers have already started it. I actually seen it recently, where you scan the QR code and they took you step by step. So they are beginning to do that. I believe there's a European law since last year where QR codes now can be put on the machines, not in place of manuals. Manuals must always be available. IPAF worked a couple of years ago, and Paul, you would remember this, to create the generic symbol of an operator that needs to be rescued versus colors and types. So they are going on the machine as well, next to the decal to show you exactly where to look.
Yeah, really good.
Any other questions there or anything for the panelists?
No,
No?
that was a good bunch of questions.
Very good. I think that's all we have. Everything okay there, Paul? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Listen, we thank everybody for coming on the call. There's a significant amount, I believe 25 countries registered. So thank you very much to Ivan and Gary and to the other contractors named earlier on. Without your help, communication, and be members of IPAF, this could have not taken place on its own. And it's really good to know that what we're putting out there is what the industry requires. So if you have any last words there, Ivan, before you go.
No, I suppose the aim of all this, as I said, maybe at the very start, is to get people home safe every evening, and hopefully we will look back in the future and this will have achieved that, and we'll see maybe percentages of, as Paul went through earlier, reducing. So hopefully it'll be a successful outcome.
Very good. Thanks, Ivan. Yourself, Gary?
Oh, not much to add. Delighted with it so far, and just thanks, lads, for getting on board with it whenever we discussed it originally 18 months ago.
Very good. Thank you. If anyone that wants to reach out, anyone on the call afterwards, reach out about being members of IPAF or contractors, what they do, please feel to reach out to us at info@ipaf.org, or myself, my email address and contact details are available on the IPAF website. For each of the individual countries, I'd like you to, contact our colleagues in each country. We all work very hard every day to make sure somebody gets home safe. That is the main aim of IPAF and why we exist. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming on the call. Wishing you the best and safe work in the future.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.